Alrighty, hello everyone. I am back from my uncomfortably long holiday hiatus, and today's video, I decided with the new year, it would be a great time to start a new series, since I'm still working on a few Vim videos in the background, and I've been getting a lot of questions lately, whether it's in comments or in emails. Some people have been emailing to my actual channel email, which I find very interesting. Or people have been talking to me online and have seen my YouTube channel and they're wondering, well, what the heck is Linux? And that's what I plan to cover in today's video, since Linux is such a core part of me computing. I thought it would be a great topic for a video. So, when people refer to Linux, just to launch into the topic, they're referring to one of two things. They're either referring to the operating system part of Linux or the actual software project known as Linux. So, what exactly is Linux in what it's really supposed to be? Well, Linux is actually a kernel. And for those of you who don't know or maybe don't have as much knowledge onto what a kernel actually is, the kernel is a piece of software that acts as an intermediary between your hardware and your application software. So, for instance, your hardware being your CPU, your memory, disk, graphics card, and your applications being your stuff like your text editor, your games, your web browser, all of that. The kernel acts as an intermediary between those, allowing your applications, your software applications, to interact with your hardware and vice versa. So the reason why the Linux kernel is so special is because of two things. Number one, it's free as in freedom, open source software. And number two, it's widely adopted in the industry today. So what do I mean when it's free software, free and open source software? Well, you can actually go to the repository for the Linux kernel and you'll find all of the changes, the commits, the released versions, and you can also even freely browse the source code. So here's the source tree, so you can go into Arch. And where is it? I think it's somewhere here. x86, yeah, there we go. So this then kernel, and as you can see, we can see all of the C source code here. So I don't know, let's open something like head64.c. And as you can see, this is source code of the Linux kernel. So you can freely browse the source code, but also because of the nature of the project, if we go back to tree, you can also see in the copying file that this software is licensed under the GNU General Public License, which is a free software license that pretty much says you can copy this anywhere, you can use it in any project as long as you maintain it as a free software project. And so that's one reason why the kernel is so popular, because of its nature of being free software, almost anybody can contribute to it. So if I pull up the log here, as you can see, we have Linus Torvalds, the original creator of the kernel, and then people like Dmitry Torokov, Yang Li, Xin Hao, a lot of different people. There's Jan Horn. There's a lot of different people that contribute to the kernel every single day. And every contribution matters, the small ones to the big ones. So that's why the kernel is so popular, because of its open nature. Anyone can contribute it, and because of that, it often is developed faster and for a much wider range of hardware architectures than something like the Windows NT kernel, which, to my knowledge, only runs on x86 and very recently ARM architecture. And because of this, it also develops really fast too. As you can see, this is the mailing list for where developers submit patches. So as you can see in the time here, pretty much every 5 to 10 minutes, you're going to get a new patch or a response to some patch. And I'm pretty sure if I even reload it, yeah, there's a bunch of new messages that come in. So this is a very fast moving project, and there's a lot that's going on. So now with that out of the way, what do people actually refer to when they talk about Linux as an operating system? Well, what they're actually referring to is Linux distributions. Now, there are so many Linux distributions out there that you cannot write them on a single piece of paper. But what a distribution is different from Linux, the kernel project, is that a distribution has the Linux kernel, but it has all the other important system utilities, like, say, a text editor, a bootloader, drivers prepackaged that may not be with the kernel, software applications like word processor, web browser, all of that other stuff. Pretty much a distribution is Linux plus all the other necessary stuff to make it an actual operating system. So these are some of the major distributions like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, MX, Arch, Gentoo. There's a lot of distributions, and each of them have different things about them all. For instance, Arch is rolling release, whereas something like MX Linux is a stable release. Ubuntu has a different package manager than Arch. Gentoo, you compile and build everything from source code, whereas Arch, you just grab binaries from the developer's repositories. So there's a lot to think about when choosing a distribution. And with that all said, if you're starting out with Linux, what would be a good distribution to choose? And that's a question a lot of new Linux users ask. And here is my recommendation. Go with Linux Mint. Linux Mint is a very stable operating system. It's been out for a long time now. It's receiving updates. It's an active project still, and it's got a lot of hardware support built into it. So, anyway, now with that said, how would you actually give Linux Mint a try? Well, what we're going to do today is actually create a virtual machine for Linux Mint. So I'm going to be assuming that you are running Windows for this, but I think it's also possible on Mac OS. I just haven't tried out yet. So right here, I have a Windows 10 virtual machine all loaded up with all of the necessary stuff to create a virtual machine with. So what we'll need is VirtualBox, which is the tool that allows us to create and run virtual machines. Then we will need an ISO file, which is just a disk image file with all the components of the operating system packed onto it. So to download both of these, first you'll want to go to virtualbox.org. This is the website that will give you VirtualBox. So on the left here, you'll want to click Downloads and then go to VirtualBox, whatever version it is. It will probably go up as time goes on from this video, but just go to this, click on Windows Hosts, and it will download an installer. Next, you'll want to go to linuxmint.com or Google up Linux Mint and click on the website. Click Download, then select the Cinnamon Edition since it's the most popular version of Mint. Click Download. Now, you'll want to scroll down and choose a mirror to download the ISO from. Now, I would recommend choosing a mirror that is close to you. So say you live in Germany, download from one of these mirrors from Germany. Or if you're in the Netherlands, download from one of these. But because I am in the United States, I will download from one of the USA mirrors. And I've had the best luck on advancedhoster.com, so just click the link and it will download the ISO for you. But of course, I already have these two components installed. So once you have both available, let's fire up VirtualBox. Now this is probably the screen you'll get when you first start a VirtualBox. Now I'm going to say something. Before you create a virtual machine, you'll want to make sure that in your BIOS settings that you have the virtualization setting enabled for your CPU. Because of how x86 architecture works, you have to actually enable virtualization first to run a lot of the ISOs of the newer distributions. For instance, Linux Mint here is actually a 64-bit ISO. So you'll want to make sure that option is on in your BIOS. Given in a quick search should bring up an article that shows you how to do it. It's not a hard process. But make sure you have that on, because otherwise, as you'll see with my install of VirtualBox, it will only give you 32-bit versions. And that's only because I'm running it in a virtual machine, and that kind of doesn't really work too well, having a virtual machine within a virtual machine. So anyway, let's start and click new. So when we create a virtual machine, let's give it a name. I'm just going to do mint VM just to be verbose. Now, the machine folder is where you'll have all of your files, mainly the hard disk file that will store all of your virtual machines' storage. I would recommend leaving this to default unless you have, say, another drive where you put big things like games or movies or stuff on. If you want to change it to that, you can. Otherwise, I just say leave it as default. Next, you'll want to set the type to Linux and the version to other Linux 64-bit. The only reason why 32-bit is showing is because I physically cannot enable CPU virtualization for the architecture since I am running in a virtual machine. Anyway, we'll click next. Now, you'll want to allocate memory for your machine. 256 megabytes is not nearly enough to run a fully graphical operating environment. So I would recommend that you go with 2000 megabytes or 2 gigabytes, not 200 gigabytes. So 2 gigabytes. If you want more, you can do more, but I would recommend no smaller than 2 gigabytes. So now we'll click next. And we'll want to create a virtual hard disk since we don't have any on our machine. So click create. Leave it as VirtualBox disk image because that will just work the best. We'll click next. And I would recommend you set it to dynamically allocated so it will only use the storage that your actual virtual machine has used. So say you've only used, like, say, 5 gigabytes out of the 10 gigabytes of your hard disk. That actual hard disk file will only be 5 gigabytes in size and not 10 gigabytes. So I would recommend that regardless. So click next. Now, 8 gigabytes is probably enough for a storage, but I personally like to leave it at 10 gigabytes just because it gives me a bit of extra room in case I do download big programs or I do some crazy stuff on it. It just gives me a bit of wiggle room to do what I want on it. And now we'll click create, and yep, our machine is now created. Of course, before you boot it up, you'll want to actually put and boot in that disk image. So what we're going to do is we're going to settings for that virtual machine, storage, then you'll want to click on the storage devices, this empty one here, and then you want to click on this little disk icon in the right. And now we're going to choose a disk file. So I have my Mint ISO on my desktop, so I'll just click it and click open and click OK. And now at this point, you are all ready to run your machine. Now I'm actually going to get a proper VM booted up on my main machine so that I can show you all how to install it and some next steps. Alrighty, so I now have my Linux Mint virtual machine all started. So you'll probably be given a menu like this when you boot up. I just click Start Linux Mint, navigate with the arrow keys and press enter. And so now we'll be booting into Linux Mint. Now as you can see my mouse, we get some nice noises, and now we're in the virtual machine. So a few things, if you come from Windows, you can already see the interface is pretty similar. You have your start menu like thing here. Now, as you can probably see in the video, it's a bit off. It's not a full 1080p display, and we can actually fix that pretty quickly. So if we click the tray button and do display, we can click display options. And I would just recommend hitting that resolution, setting it to 1920 by 1080p for that full experience, and just so you can have all of your screen real estate used. So now we have a Linux Mint virtual machine. We got everything we want. But now let's actually get to installing it. So right here on the desktop, you'll see this Install Linux Mint icon. Just double click that and it will pull up the installer. So you'll want to select your language. We'll just click continue. If you're running something like a Dvorak or some other weird form of keyboard layout, set it here, but I'm pretty sure my keyboard is working. Yeah, my keyboard is working, so we can press continue. Now for multimedia codecs, I would just recommend installing this regardless. Most of the time, you probably won't need this, but it's good to install it just in case. Now we're going to click continue, and we'll wait for it to work. And you'll want to, since we're in the virtual machine, we really don't have to worry about our disk since it's just being passed in a virtual disk, but you will definitely, if installing this on actual hardware, want to make sure that anything important from that disk is off the disk, and that because you will erase everything on it. But since we're on a virtual machine, I'm just going to click install now. And now it will show you what disk will be overwritten. I have a virtual disk because this is a virtual machine. Just click continue, and now it will start the install process. Now you'll want to take your time zone, and that time zone is kind of wrong for me, so we will just do, I don't know, New York. We'll click continue, and now this is where you'll set up your username. So I'm just gonna call this, oh gosh, I cannot type today, theory, and then the computer name, we'll just call this Mint VM. And this is just a username and a password. Give some good password, a strong password. I'm gonna type in mine. Obviously weak because this is a virtual machine and I honestly don't really care. I say don't enable encrypt my home folder just because it's a virtual machine, and honestly there's probably not going to be much important on the virtual machine. But if you do have a actual bare metal install and you want to encrypt the home folder, you can definitely do that. But now since we set up the user, we can click continue, and it should start the install process, or finish it in this case. And now I'm just going to wait, but there's a lot of features of this, so while it's installing, you can probably just poke around, check out what they have. I know they've got some pretty cool stuff in here. You know, you got your Office software, you have music and stuff. So there's a lot that comes in. But I think I'm going to wait for this to finish installing, and then I'll come back to y'all guys. Alrighty, so my install just finished. Now you can of course continue testing in the actual virtual machine, the installation ISO, but I'm just going to click restart now, and it will restart my machine. So now we'll need to remove the installation media. So what I'm just going to do is go into here and change that boot options, disable that. Oh, I need to shut down the machine. So we'll just force it off. I will remove that ROM, and now it's gone, and we can start it up again. Go into that boot menu, and we will boot into that VirtIO disk. And now, as you can see, we have Mint booting up. So now, congratulations, you have a Mint virtual machine. You'll probably everything will be messed up in terms of graphics, but of course you can always change that. So let's actually go do that now. So it gives you some fancy effects. So I'm just gonna go increase that display size so my eyes don't just die staring at this screen. And we'll keep the configuration and close the window, and now we have Linux Mint. So this is kind of that welcome. So it will show you a bunch of different things that you can get started. Of course, I'm going to go dark mode because I'm the real hacker man. So this will go through a bit of everything that you can do with Mint, whether it's drivers, system snapshots for backups, firewall, getting software. It also has some interesting stuff like documentation, contributions, and help. So we can just click X, and congratulations, you now have a Linux Mint machine. So now if you're wondering what the heck to do with this, well, I can give you a few challenges to do. So first of all, my challenge to you would be to install a piece of software. So install maybe a different web browser like a Qt browser or Pale Moon. Another thing I would recommend is maybe if you're one of the more programming inclined people out there, create a simple C Hello World project, or maybe something in another programming language like, I don't know, Go or Rust, something like that. Or if you aren't really a programmer, but you want to do some work, maybe do your next homework assignment if you're still in school, or you do all that kind of stuff in a virtual machine. Maybe you're writing an essay for your English class, so maybe use one of the office tools here and write your next essay in a virtual machine. Of course, those are just some suggestions and some challenges that you can do right now. After this video, I'm probably going to publish a bit of a tutorial on how to use the Linux command line. And if you have installed a virtual machine, you can probably follow along with that in the command line on this Mint virtual machine. And I'll probably actually be doing that tutorial in this virtual machine as well. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.